when you're in addiction, you are isolated. You're cutting yourself off from every relationship, to any meaningful communications with people, any connection whatsoever. And then it's like, oh, I wonder why I'm drinking myself to death or using myself or doing whatever to death. And it's like, because what else have you got going on?
So I'm Jo. I'm in recovery from my gambling addiction, and I haven't gambled now for 2 years.
I'm Patrick. I'm also recovering compulsive gambler. I've been in recovery for 5 years now.
Hi, my name's Thomas. I'm also in recovery, particularly from ketamine for almost 5 years, and I'm also a public speaker.
Yeah, my name's Cullan. I'm a recovering heroin addict. I've been clean for 3 years now, so yeah.
Hi, I'm Janet. I call myself an addict because I was addicted to sleeping pills and just self-harm and things like that, but also my main thing was alcohol. I got sober at 20 and I'm now 28.
Hey, I'm Eliza. I'm a business owner and Instagram influencer person. I'm an alcoholic and addict. My drugs of choice were alcohol primarily and cocaine, and I've been sober 6.5 years.
Can you go a bit deeper into how it all started for you?
I'm actually Irish despite my horrible English accent, but so I grew up in Ireland where there's no such thing as an alcoholic. It's just a guy that likes to drink. My father, who I don't have a relationship with anymore, I haven't for a long time, is, as far as I'm aware, still a chronic gambler, very violent and abusive individual, also an alcoholic. My childhood, me and my two brothers, we just had an horrific childhood, full of domestic violence, full of screaming, shouting, things being smashed, my mum being beaten up. We were beaten up as well as children. We suffered what are known as ACEs, which I'm sure you're all aware of, adverse childhood experiences, a lot of trauma, a lot of pain. It was actually alcohol when I was about 16, but I never really liked it because I assumed that if I drank alcohol, I ended up like my father, and I didn't want to be that person at all. So I didn't really take to alcohol, but I did take to drugs. So I tried cocaine, which was my first drug that I tried. And to be honest, I loved it for the first few years. The honeymoon period lasted a good few years, and then I realised that I was an addict. Whether I was in a good mood or a bad mood, or it was sunny or it was raining, I needed cocaine to survive, to get up and go to work. And I was what's called a functioning addict. But then I was around about 19, 20, I got introduced, about 18, 19. I tried ketamine for the first time, which was quite a popular drug with the people that I sort of associated myself with. And I instantly got hooked straight away. And for me, what it did was it just numbed me. I always felt very, very insecure, very unsure about who I was and who I wanted to be. I also had, massive underlying issues, trust issues, relationship issues. I had issues around, I never felt loved by my father in particular, and I always felt that was my fault. I always felt that the abuse and trauma that I went through as a child, I believed that it was because of me. I felt that I was worthless and that I was just a worthless piece of shit that didn't deserve anybody's love. So I had a very complex mind, I guess, at the time. And with ketamine, it just shut it all up. I'd have bumps of keys, and then that drastically got worse and worse. And that lasted for, till I was 32 years old. I had a very highly successful career throughout that period as well. There was bits and bats where I was way worse than what I was. But then I was made redundant in 2018. I lost my apartment. I'd just come out of a long-term relationship. I'd lost everything. And I just went out of control. I was using from probably a gram of ketamine would last me and two of my friends, maybe 2 nights out, to snorting anything from an ounce upwards a day. So like 28 grams of ketamine. And then I made 2 decisions. I gave myself 2 choices, which was in 2018, at the end of the year, I was either going to take my life, which I'd tried a few times and obviously it wasn't successful, or I fix it, and I really fix it. So it was all or nothing for me. It was either death, which I was dying anyway. I was using that much drugs that to the extent I lost like half my body weight. I was 6 stone. I looked like what you would imagine a stereotypical drug addict to look like, even though I only looked like that for a very short period throughout my addiction. And I worked my ass off to get into rehab. Did 6.5 months in rehab, and around about 9 months in the resettlement program, which is called re-entry. And then after that, I guess the rest is history. I stopped using any kind of drug, any kind of substance, anything that's particularly addictive. I believe that recovery is abstinence, and I just keep it as simple as that.
I didn't experience anything unlike many children do in families, but I was a sensitive person. I now know that I'm autistic. I didn't know that then. But I felt things very much. And when I first started using alcohol and other drugs, which I encountered about 14, unknowingly to me, I used those as a coping mechanism to just take the edge off my feelings. Prior to that, I had an eating disorder, which I only mention because there's a common theme going on there. I just wanted to control how I felt. What I understand today about alcohol specifically is it kind of breaks the little synapses between your neurons. So you just think a bit less, you're not chronically overanalyzing everything all the time. And I found it easier to just be on the same level as everyone else, and I found it easier to bond with other people. I started running into trouble with cocaine first. I was at that point early 20s, and I was using about 4 or 5 grams of cocaine a day, sometimes more. Obviously, financially, that is quite difficult to maintain, and there are a lot of medical emergencies, ambulances, heart problems, things like that. Eventually, I got myself to a point where every time I used that substance, there would be an ambulance. So just that bit of classical conditioning made me put that down a little bit, and I thought, well, I'll just drink. Drinking's normal. Everyone does that. That's cool. And I think I was about 23 when I started just picking up the vodka a lot more regularly and putting down the cocaine. And by 26, I didn't have a home. I didn't have any money. I had no dignity. There were a lot of suicide attempts. I was very aggressive, arrested, fights, beating up my own dad. It took me very quick, alcohol did. And someone came around my house. Someone my mum had been speaking to. I wasn't in contact with my mum, but she'd been speaking to a colleague, and this colleague came around my house. And because I was so desperate, I'd literally just had another suicide attempt and another ambulance, and I was just so scared to be in my own company. I didn't want to start drinking again, but I had no other choice. That was my only coping mechanism for all the pain that I was in. It was the first conversation I'd had, and bearing in mind I'd walked into counsellors, I'd walked into doctors, I couldn't really figure out what was wrong, but I didn't have the words, and no one seemed to be able to help because I couldn't articulate what it was. And that was the first conversation I'd had with someone who kind of laughed at my stories in a sense of, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, same. Yeah, I've done that. And there was this woman, very well-to-do woman, put together. I mean, she brushed her hair and put makeup on, she'd just come out of a job. And it took me a while. I think it took me about a year, but at 27, I got sober. I think one thing I'll say about recovery is that, yeah, you put the thing down, that's cool, but that is the beginning. It's a real journey. It's a real, process.
My issue is, I guess, more behavioural than substance-based, and gambling, which was my primary addiction, wasn't part of my life at all until I was 19 years old, unlike a lot of addicts. My childhood was pretty idyllic. I was very high achieving. I was very fortunate in my background, my education. I had everything you could possibly want I suppose. And then at university, which is where gambling started for me, I was a professional sportsman at the time, and I got introduced to gambling. The first bet I ever placed was on a roulette machine in a betting shop in Durham, and it won. And I can never explain the feeling that I got from that moment. And the irony is I spent the next 13 years trying to replicate the feeling that that moment gave me unsuccessfully. And I wasn't addicted immediately, but I was hooked. I loved it. And not a day went past for the next 13 years where I didn't gamble. Again, like we've just heard, it wasn't a problem at first. It was money that I could afford to lose. It was time that I had to do it. And then a year later, my cricket career came to an end. And people experience trauma in different ways and means different things to different people. But that moment in my life was huge because suddenly I'd gone from having everything I wanted, being everything that I wanted, to having lost that. And that moment hit me really hard. And then my relationship with gambling changed completely because it started to play a different role in my life. I then moved into London. I got a very good job in the city working in finance, and I started to do it more and more. The culture and environment that surrounded me was all about having money and having as much as you possibly can, and I wanted it. I worked even harder, and then in 2010, a year into my time in London, one night I went out to celebrate some good news at work. I put a bet on, and that night I won £35,000 from a football accumulator. And it sounds like the best thing that could ever happen to anybody, but it was without doubt the worst thing that happened to me because, again, it was another change in my relationship with this drug, because now every time I did it, I wanted to win £35,000. And if I didn't, it didn't give me the same feeling. And I tried to do it every time. I didn't tell a single person in the world that I won that money that night, which I guess shows how much of a problem it was. But I lost it in a matter of 4 weeks. And when it was gone, I wanted it back. And of course, then I started to feel different things. I started to feel guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, stupid. And I started to combat those feelings by drinking a lot of alcohol, by taking drugs, because they were the only things that made me forget about what was going on with my gambling. And I started to do things that obviously I will regret forever, because I started to borrow money once all the payday loans, credit cards, bank loans had run out. I started to borrow money off individuals who had huge amounts of money that I was connected to by lying to them. I promised to pay them back. I didn't pay a penny back. I gambled it all away. And I knew at some point I was going to get found out. I just didn't know when that was going to be. But my biggest issue was I couldn't handle the shame and the stigma that was attached to it. And then in 2018, it all came to a head when my employers found out what was going on. And I knew at that point I was going to lose everything, my house, my job. Once that had happened, as was said earlier, I had two choices. And I think the irony of a gambling addiction, which is probably a little bit different to other addictions, is the only thing you think's ever going to solve it is the thing that's caused it in the first place. Because I don't think any alcoholic ever tries to drink themselves sober. But as a gambling addict, you think all I need to do is win the money back, get rid of the financial problem, and then I can stop. And I tried. Coincidentally, it was the start of the Cheltenham Horse Racing Festival. And I had about £500,000 worth of gambling debt. And I honestly believed I could gamble my way out of the problem, and I tried. I borrowed some money off somebody that had already borrowed money off, told them another lie I'm not very proud of. And during that festival, I tried to win the money back. I won, I lost, and then eventually I knew time was running out, so I decided to put the money that I'd built up over the 3 days on one bet. One horse in one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. And I said to myself, if that horse wins, I'll win that money back. I'll pay everybody back. I'll stop gambling. I don't lose my house and I might lose my house and my job. I don't go to prison, which I thought was going to happen, but life can continue. And if it doesn't win, then I'm going to go and do the unthinkable. I watched my horse come second by a couple of lengths and my whole world come crashing down. And I don't need to go into too much detail, but I attempted to take my own life in various different ways, and then eventually ended up at a train station. Was moments away from killing myself, and then something changed, and it was at that moment that I thought about other people, not just myself. And I'd hit the self-destruct button for so long. I thought so little of myself, but I thought I can't do this to other people. And at that point I reached out to my brother. I told him what I was about to do, and unfortunately for me, he responded in a way that I wasn't expecting, and changed everything, because he basically said to me, look, just be honest. Don't do what you're about to do, because he said that he wouldn't be able to cope, and he said, look, just tell me what's going on and we'll find a way out. And weirdly, I stood back, and the weight of the world had dropped off my shoulders. I'd finally told someone I had this problem that I couldn't deal with myself, and I could get the help that deep down I knew I was desperate for, and I had been for a long time. And I came clean to my family, everybody. I lost my house, my job, but I went to rehab, and I got the help that I needed.
So I started gambling just on a one-off bet on the football. I don't even watch football, but my stepdad, he likes to, watch a game and put a bet on. He's not a huge gambler or anything like that, but I was at a loose end on this particular day, and I was being nosy, and I was like, what are you doing? And he told me, so I was like, oh, I'm going to have a go at that, So I put a bet on the football I knew nothing about. I just guessed, and the bet won. So that made me feel like, wow, I'm so good at this. So I had some money in my account, and I explored the website to see what else I could have a go on. And I came across the slots, and it was from when I found them slots, that's what really got me hooked. When I started winning, the feeling was just like, I've never felt something so good in my life, like, wow. To the point, I started losing then, and I couldn't accept that. I couldn't accept that I wasn't winning anymore. So I would constantly chase everything that I've lost. Even if I did have a big win or something, that was never enough. I would just convince myself, oh, I'll spend half of it, and then literally get down to zero. And, made me feel depressed. I didn't see any friends, I didn't text anybody, nothing. I just was by myself, getting depressed in this world of my own, which in a way I quite liked, because I could never handle emotions, I would always, I'm autistic as well. I can't, I can't show if I'm sad. I can't show if I'm, do you know what I mean? And I always thought it was wrong. So when I was gambling, I was in this world and nothing else existed. No other feelings, nothing. I got to the point where actually I think the only way out is to not be alive anymore. I had no self-worth, I had no confidence, nothing. And I couldn't imagine my life without gambling. So at this point, I didn't know that you could be addicted to gambling. I didn't know it was a thing. So I had a look online, and I came across Gordon Moody, and I applied to go on their women's retreat, which was retreat and counselling program. It wasn't residential. So I did that, and, that was amazing. They saved my life. I learned all about my addiction, and, I learned about myself. I learned, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to, feel unhappy. But as long as you're dealing with these things, I was getting through, managing, and my hair started to fall out because of the stress from the gambling. This made me feel really depressed. I didn't even know how to cope with hair loss, because hair, especially for a woman, you know what I mean? It's like, wow, it's a big thing, isn't it? And so I had a major relapse. I didn't know how to cope, to be honest, and I didn't care either. I started gambling again. I was hiding it. I isolated myself again. Got to the point where, I wanted to not be alive again. And something clicked, and I just thought, right, I need to reach out for help again. So I did. And thankfully, they took me back on the programme. And yeah, I managed to, be on track. Stop myself from gambling, and then I was referred on to the Epic Restart Foundation, who I'm fortunate enough to be working for now. I think, as a woman who is in recovery from gambling, I think it's important to share my story and, just reassure people that there is plenty of help out there, and, you're not on your own. There's nothing to be ashamed about at all.
For me, I include lots of things into the addiction bracket that I know not necessarily everybody would. For me, it started expressing itself when I was about 14, 15. I developed an eating disorder. And I mention that to say because I almost was addicted to the numbers, the weight loss. It wasn't even that, I didn't want to be skinny. I was naturally very small. But it was this thing that I could quantify, that I could see it drop. And it gave me some form of serotonin boost when it went down. And, this thing of my life for a long time was this game of emotional whack-a-mole, where, I beat the eating disorder, and then I started self-harming, and then I'd stop self-harming, and then it was always this, if you imagine a little toddler, it's always grabby hands onto something that would just make me feel a little bit better. And I discovered alcohol when I was maybe 15, 16. I was always known for being incredibly shy. That was my whole branding. When I did TV and stuff, it was just, oh, she's the shy girl, But it wasn't shyness. It was self-hatred portrayed in an almost palatable way, where I didn't speak because I felt like I didn't have anything to offer. I would never look people in the eye. I never wanted to, again, that burden feeling. I never wanted to burden anybody. But for me, alcohol then became this way of me having fun. For the first time, getting drunk allowed me to not overthink, not that tape that was always playing in the back of my head that was, you're worthless, you're awful. If anybody knew how awful of a person you are, they would cast you away. That tape that was always playing just shut off and it stopped. And I could do things that I would never be able to do sober at the time, which was dance, laugh, be outward, be all of the things that I always in the inside wanted to be. And it was always reinforced as well by people that I would hang out with, that they're like, oh, you're such a fun drunk. And what started off as a bottle of wine and having a little dance around my room and singing into my hairbrush quickly turned into turning up to the studio hungover, trying to do a vocal after I've just been sick in the bathroom. And basically by 20, I'd reached an absolute breaking point emotionally. That realization that the pain that I was putting myself through wasn't comfortable. It was just familiar. And I went to my first ever AA meeting, and it was an all-women's meeting on a Saturday. And I walk into this room. Obviously, all I'd ever seen was the things you see on TV, and it's like dark, smoky rooms with like old men, and it's, you know, and it was not that. It was all these beautiful women with amazing personalities, laughing, joking, and I sat there and I heard someone share their story, and it resonated. But what I latched onto was the thing that was weighing me down, that made life unbearable, that made me try to take my life on multiple occasions, this thing that possessed me and that owned me, they were laughing about. And I was like, wait, we can do that? We can joke about this? I realized that for me, AA and meetings are great, but I have psychological things going on. Everyone has their own traumas to unpack and deal with, but through that journey of not only just doing that approach, but also going and getting a psychiatrist, going and getting a therapist, and all of these things, I found out that I have borderline personality disorder and bipolar, and well, ADHD as well, for some spice. But from addressing that, I realized that these addictive patterns, these addictive behaviors come from a condition that I have, and it's a symptom of a condition that I have.
I used to hate using the scapegoat, mental health, but I started to kind of notice that I was different. So my mind would be telling me that I have to do certain things to make sure I'm okay, my family are okay. And I've later on found out that it's basically a severe form of OCD. All my friends were smoking cannabis and stuff like that, but I didn't bother doing that type of stuff. And then in year 10, year 11 of high school, it got really bad, and it just got to a point where, I thought, I'm gonna try and smoke a spliff, have a little drink with my mates, which, in them times, if you don't do that, you're kind of left out anyway. So I wanted to fit in with them anyway. They were all drinking and stuff, and I just started doing it myself. So the drink was fine, but then when I started trying the cannabis, I became this kid who was like, would never touch it, scared to touch it because I might die, to ended up being the person who was like the biggest weed smoker out of all my mates. And it became very obsessive very quickly, to the point where I was selling my personal belongings for weed, And during that time, my uncle came out of prison. He was just due out of prison. And although he's done this crime, he was 10 feet tall to me. I actually thought he was like the coolest man on earth, And I started hanging around with him because I stopped hanging around with my friends. I felt very lonely, and I didn't know, I just gravitated to him. And very quickly, I was exposed to a life of just wild stuff I never, I was never exposed to before. Started drinking, started taking cocaine, taking pills, Valium, pregabalin, whatever. Anything really I could get my hands on to kind of take away my OCD kind of traits, and also just to kind of get over, I just broke up friends with my best mate. And at the time, it felt like it was just nothing. This'll blow over and everything will be fine again. Yeah, it got to one stage where I was out one night with a friend who I knew from school. We were taking cocaine, and I went back to the flat where my uncle's kind of base was and his friends, and they were all in there, and they were all smoking something on a can of Coke. And I knew what it was because I'd seen it anyway for so long when I was hanging around with them. And someone offered me some and I took some. And it's hard to explain. It's like taking cocaine, but it's like, it hitting you instantly. And the rush is just unbearable. Like, you can't speak, your ears are ringing. It's just this intense feeling. And it was amazing. Quickly, I'd say less than a minute after taking that, I started to get these bad effects, side effects, kind of the side effects I got when I was smoking the weed. You know, cocaine's a stimulant, and it was really kind of magnifying my thoughts without my OCD. And I started kind of pranging out a little bit, and someone said, oh, have a puff of this. And it was a spliff, and I thought, well, if I smoke that, it's going to make me 10 times worse. And he went, no, it's not weed, it's gear. He said it was gear, which was heroin. I was just looking for anything at the time to just take away the feeling I was feeling, that panic. And I just said, yeah, let me have a puff. And I took 2 drags of the spliff, and that was it. That's how everything started for me. It took away everything. It was like the keys to everything I've been asking unlocked. And that's when the prison started. That's when the offending started. And I became a shoplifter who would travel up and down the country every single day. And it's like we say, we spend or we use to the last grain, don't we? You know, I'd make thousands, hundreds a day. And in the morning, I'm waking up asking someone for a cigarette. Like, you know, because it all had to go on the drug. And after, you know, I think I've been in jail over 10 times, all for the same stuff, all petty crime just to fund my habit. 2020 came around, which was coronavirus year, the worst year for a lot of people, you know, ended up being the best year of my life because I made a lot of money shoplifting. No, I'm joking. That's not really. No, well, I did actually, because what it was. No, it was. It actually was. I'll tell you why. Because I was allowed to wear a mask and no one would question me, you know, and people would go nowhere near me when I was going in the shops because they thought I had COVID, you know. So I made a lot of money during lockdown. But if you make a lot of money as an addict, what are you going to do? You're going to smoke it all in you. And, you know, the more money, the more I abused the drug, and it got to a point where my body couldn't take it no more. And my close friend, my partner in crime, I should say, he passed away. And the same day he passed away, I was rushed into hospital. I almost died as well. When I was in that hospital, I actually thought I was going to die. Like it was to the point where if I tried taking my gas mask off, I was kind of going out of control. I couldn't breathe without this mask. And I prayed to a higher power. Like I'm not religious, and I know we're in a religious setting right now. Maybe it's saying something, but I prayed to a higher power. I just said, please let me get through this, and I promise I will never use again. You know, that was my rock bottom.
Is addiction a choice or is it an illness?
For me, I don't believe it's a disease at all, and I struggled in rehab with that belief. When I first went to rehab, I'd never used heroin or crack, so I used to automatically think that I wasn't as bad as a junkie or a crackhead. Even though I was a kethead, and I'll show you all a picture of what I used to look like, I was 6 stone and nearly dead. I do believe that recovery is different for the individual, but for me, I do believe in abstinence, which I guess is a fundamental approach to the 12 steps. I just don't believe it's a disease. I don't believe I was born with some biological or genetical predisposition that determined that I would be an addict. I believe I grew up in the right environment that created a lot of shit that would mean that I would run away and escape, and I found drugs as a form of escapism.
I think addiction starts with a choice, but a lot of people can't make an informed choice. But I know that the gambling was ultimately down to me. It was me that placed that bet, and I have to take, for me personally, I have to take responsibility in my recovery. I can't blame other things and other people. There are external factors that definitely played a part and could have done more or could have done less, but ultimately it's about me.
I always have cowered at the whole disease thing. I'm like, bit extreme. But I understand why they use it. And I also understand that whole, people have controversies with the 12-step because of God and all of this kind of stuff. But I think psychologically, it's very interesting because realistically, an addict is living their life very selfishly. It's a very selfish lifestyle. You're not considering anybody else but yourself, right? So by going, hey, God, whatever you want it to be. I remember when I went to recovery, there was a woman who believed in the bumblebees. that was her God. And I was like, okay, cool. That's whatever you want it to
God of
be.
your
As long as it's not you, and as
Yeah.
long as it's not another person, God is whatever you want it to be in recovery. But psychologically, it makes the addict not see themselves as the center of their own universe. That it's not thy will be done. It's not, it's my will. It tries to remove themselves from that. And I find I don't cower at, taking accountability for what I've done, but the whole notion of choice I find particularly difficult, because I am of an age where in school we had all the drug programs, all the people coming in and sharing their stories, every single workbook, every single Friday, we were doing something to do with sex, drugs, alcohol, all the things. But someone can have all the education and all the knowing, but it's not going to stop it.
Yeah.
And when we over-pathologize addiction and recovery to things like, if we just tell people more, and if we just do this and we just do this, it's going to take this problem away. Addiction's going to continue to exist.
Yeah, I think you had a really pertinent point in the fact that when you were telling your story, you were saying, you classify yourself as an addict because it's kind of anything we touch, isn't it? It doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. I'm stealing this from a psychologist, Gabor Mate, who I'm absolutely obsessed with, okay?
I'm meeting him next month.
No.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm going to make friends with you. So he kind of says, addiction in itself is not necessarily genetic, i.e. an illness which is inherited, but you can have certain predispositions in your nature. What I find amongst my peers as addicts, and what I've picked up from some of your stories, is that whatever you've used or behaviourally done, it's to escape from your feelings, right? So my emotions take my whole body. I am my emotions. Like that, I can't compartmentalise my emotions very well. That is part of my character. That potentially is inherited, right? Environment, yes, I was around drugs when I was young. I had friends that did drugs. That made me feel good, so I'm going to fixate. So exercise, that's been one, and that was in recovery.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
And you get applause for it. It's like,
Absolutely.
you're doing
These are
looking after yourself. You look amazing.
Yeah, workaholism.
I'm dying.
Yeah, well done, you made money. So while I don't think I was born a drug addict or alcoholic, and addiction in itself, I think it's quite dangerous to just lump addiction as an illness, because then you're ignoring the thinking and the emotionality and the things that are going to come up after you put the drug or alcohol down.
I believe that everyone's recovery is different. I think the way we get on drugs and the way we come off it is totally different support structures. The way we think's different. I don't stand for 12 steps myself. I'm not a fan of it. I think they ostracize everyone else who doesn't do 12 steps.
Little club, innit?
Yeah. This ain't a hate campaign right now.
You do get a bit of hate for it, because I did up to step 4, and I was like, I'll go to meetings and I'll do this, and
take what you want from it.
Yeah,
I think,
but then they're like, oh, you haven't done them, and they're like, almost they stand back and kind of do it. Can't wait for you to fall so I can say that you didn't do the steps.
I've been invited to so many talks. Can you sit at the chair? I don't even know what the chair means. I said, I'll be there, You've done 12 steps? No. Oh, you can't sit at the chair.
Yeah.
Recovery is recovery in my
I've had
sense.
to lie
You
into
get
that.
And not all rooms are like that.
I felt I travelled too far to turn around. I've tried it. And they were like,
but I do think we all have addictive personalities, or ones who have fell to addiction. We have addictive personalities. Right now, I am just fully focused on achieving in my life, and I'm addicted to that, and when I say illness, disease, I'm just talking about some people who identify that, but
It's an easy way of saying it.
It's
really.
an easy way of saying it, I think I was probably born with an addictive personality, and I've just been hyperventilated on different things, and I just managed to pick up the pipe and the foil at one stage in my life.
Understanding that recovery is what works for you.
Yeah.
And what works for you might not work for somebody else, but if it works for you, then keep doing it.
12 steps works for probably lots of people.
But not everyone.
No,
it works for me, but not everyone.
And I hear people about meetings saying to be in recovery, to stay. You've got to keep doing that. For some people they do, for other people they don't, or they may do for the first year, or it's whatever works for you. And I think it's really important that people understand that. And if you're not doing what everybody else is doing, it doesn't matter.
What's also important to think about for me, because it's that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, that it's connection. And that goes back to, everyone knows the famous like cocaine rat, you know, where they did the study where they put the rats in the cage and they'd always go back to the cocaine. They redid that study with another cage, not just cocaine and no cocaine. They put a little ratopia in there. So they had a little girlfriend rat, little like lovely wheels, lovely fun things that it can go and do, and it's having a good time. And the cocaine was there. And the rat never went to the cocaine because it's got nice things going on. It's got relationships. It's got fun. It's got drive. It's got things to keep it going. And when you put we always, with a lot of addicts, and I'm sure most people can relate to that, is when you're in addiction, you are isolated. You're cutting yourself off from every relationship, to any meaningful communications with people, any connection whatsoever. And then it's like, oh, I wonder why I'm drinking myself to death or using myself or doing whatever to death. And it's like, because what else have you got going on?
A lot of the things I've read were about, addiction is almost always a cross addiction.
I think whack-a-mole was mentioned. And for me, the goal of all this is balance, right? So you're constantly going to be doing a bit of this, but the whole goal, for me anyway, what symbolises recovery for me is not one extreme of like perfectly sober, not doing anything, meditating on a mountain, and that's it, and not smash drunk, doing cocaine like in a seedy basement somewhere. It's kind of somewhere in the middle of the two extremes of anything that I'll usually go to. Some people have that. Some people innately have that. I've got friends that are naturally quite balanced. But me, it's a constant effort.
And I think one of the most, just to pick up on what you said, one of the most powerful tools, gifts in recovery is self-awareness. My addictive personality, I've stopped gambling, but my addictive personality still exists hugely. And it manifests itself in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways. And people have already said about addicted to exercise, and they're things that are more acceptable and you kind of get applaud. But it's about, as you said, the balance. But it's also having the awareness that it's something that you could lose control with or could get out of control. And
my mum used to say, you've got an addictive personality, you have. Get down the gym. I never did. I wish I could get addicted to the gym, you know, and maybe one day I will, you know.
That's how it's not a choice.
Waiting on that. So yeah, like addiction is, you know.
For me, I was very much addicted to the escape element of it. I think I definitely have the potential to, you know, at the time I was drinking a lot of alcohol, so that was potentially another addiction that I could have gone down that road. Like when I was at school, for instance, I would drink alcohol because I wasn't okay with myself. You know, I had no confidence, so I would drink to get that. It makes me feel brave. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't accept who I was, basically. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't fit in anywhere. So, you know, I think I do have an addictive personality. I think now, going through recovery in gambling, I think it's about finding healthier escapes for myself and, you know, accept who I am.
It's that thing, I think, like cross addiction, if you're pinning it on one substance or another substance, or like this behaviour and that substance, you're kind of missing the point. Like it's the underlying drive to get out of myself, to get away from myself, to escape, to find safety, because there is no happiness or safety in here.
But for me, when I really reflected upon what I was doing, I just wanted to feel comfortable. I hate using the word normal, but like I wanted to feel comfortable with myself, because every day when I used to wake up, I hated looking at it. Even when I didn't look particularly like an addict, I hated myself. Even if I dressed nice or hung around with good-looking people or whatever, like I always felt like horrible and ugly. And I don't mean aesthetically ugly, I mean inside. I felt disgusted and always guilty and shameful of who I was and why I was like I was. But when I went through rehab and all that, it allowed me, one of the things to do was to learn about myself and actually to feel comfortable,
I think about using all the time. I don't know if any of you think about gambling or drinking, but
sometimes.
It's my biggest fear, and I still think about it sometimes. And I'm scared of that word relapse. Like I'm scared of it. And I don't know if it's because I'm scared of that I try and not agree with that word, but I think when someone says the word relapse, you put back to square one.
Yeah, they remove any progress that you did make.
Yeah, when it's not necessarily like that. I mean, it's not like...
It's like snakes and ladders. They just go, back to zero.
Well, you know, PlayStation's got memory cards now, innit? So put your memory cards, go back to where you was. That's how I feel. No, back in the day, you'd have a Mega Drive if the electric went. You've got to start from the beginning. We've got memory cards, innit? Do you know what I mean? And we should be able to go back to everything we've learned, everything we've achieved, and that's how I look at blips, I call them.
There's always a lesson.
There's always a lesson.
In everything.
It's never...
It's positive or negative, there's always a lesson. And I think when people relapse, they think, that's it, I might as well just carry on. Or generally, that's what people probably think. But then also if you can learn in that and come back better and stronger.
I relate to you in the sense that I don't really think about alcohol anymore as such. I do, especially going through quite deep emotional pain over the past 2 years. I very often wish I had a way to turn it off, and that's what I'm really wanting when I want alcohol, you know, like it doesn't exist.
I think sometimes it's also really important that people don't become in recovery. They don't become too obsessed with how long they've been in recovery, because that scares a lot of people when it comes to relapsing. Because suddenly if you relapse, you're starting again on that journey.
All that time.
Well, I had
and then
to
you
stop
hear
it.
other people who say, I've been clean, sober for 20 years, and it becomes a competitive thing. And I think if you are somebody who is in recovery and you have relapsed, I think it's really important that you don't become too obsessed and set upon that.
Do you think that addiction manifests differently in men and women?
With the stigma that is attached to certain addictions, and I think Joe would talk about this, gambling, often seen as very male-dominated problem, issue, a thing that blokes do more than women, if I'm allowed to say that. And so therefore, if you're somebody who's struggling with it, it's probably harder to get help, just like with eating disorders. I know a lot of guys that have very serious eating disorders but won't talk about it because it's a problem that women have. And I don't think there's a difference. You've got an addiction, you're a drug addict, you're an alcoholic, you're a compulsive gambler, whatever it is, but it's what's perhaps some of these kind of preconceived ideas or stereotypes that mean actually it's probably harder to do something about it. That I think is probably more of a problem than it actually being different, whether you're a man or a woman.
So you're saying that men and women equally have eating disorders, but it's harder for a man to open up?
I think so.
I think there might be some sort of cultural or social like swinging more towards acceptable addictions for a male or a female. But the thing about addiction is, which is weirdly enough what I find beautiful but also very worrying, is the fact that we discriminate addicts for being addicts, whatever the addiction, whatever it is, the vice or whatever. But addiction doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care what colour you are, what religion you are, what sex you are, your gender or sexual orientation. It literally doesn't give a shit. Apart from all it cares about is that you give it everything that you love and cherish.
There are equal numbers of men and women, say, in alcoholism recovery, you know, but it's actually quite dangerous the way stereotypes are, because I'm chugging away at my vodka, you know. There's no way in hell I'm becoming an alcoholic. I'm a young woman.
Drinking in a bar.
Drinking in a bar. If I was like, the stereotype of an alcoholic did not fit my image at all, so it got way too far.
Would advice would you give someone who's in an active stage of addiction right now, have a loved one who's in an active stage?
It's never too late.
Yeah.
That cliche word, 2-3 years into my addiction as a heroin addict, a junkie, you smackhead, I didn't think I would ever change my life. I never thought I'd have a beautiful partner, a family, my friends back, a paid job. I've got a criminal record that thick. My DBS was that thick when it came back. I've got a paid job, a legit job. I go around saying I speak to people who once hated me, police officers and stuff like that, and they're taking in and trying to understand my story. Being allowed in schools. The only place I haven't been yet is the prisons. I'm trying to get in there, but,
Not back there, obviously.
No, yeah, the other way.
I said it earlier, I definitely encourage anybody, reach out for help. Don't suffer on your own. You're not on your own. There's plenty of support out there. We're sitting here as proof that you can recover, and there's nothing to be ashamed about whatsoever.
For me, I think what I would say to someone in active addiction is just you deserve to be sober. You deserve to have a life that you like yourself at the bare minimum. You deserve to be happy. And just at the core, you actually deserve it. When I first got into recovery and I was in rehab, I couldn't even say, because I'm worth it. It wouldn't come out of my mouth. But you are. Every single human being on this planet is deserving of love and deserves to be happy and deserves to, again, at the bare minimum, like yourself, And
that you gotta do it for yourself. I tried to stop 13 years. I tried to stop God knows how many times, but ultimately I wasn't ready to stop. And there's a big difference if you're in active addiction of saying you want to stop and actually stopping.
Yeah.
And you really do. It's not easy. It takes a lot of bravery, a lot of courage, a lot of time, a lot of determination. But you have to really want to do it, and you have to commit to it. And it gets easier.
It does.
But somebody said it earlier. You can't do it because other people want you to do it, because that doesn't work. It's got to come from you, and there's got to be a real desire to get out of it, and there is always a way out. There's help. Talking is so important, but you've got to want to do it.
I get a lot of people contact me online, as I said earlier, and I think if you're someone that loves an addict of any kind, the only one thing that you can really do is hope. You can hope that they can change their lives. As we've all established and said numerous times, we can't force anybody to change.
No.
And I tried that for a little bit myself. I sort of became during lockdown, a coach for recovery, and I had this sort of messiah complex that I thought I could speak to anybody and change their lives, and I was so wrong. So wrong. Thankfully, I only did it for a little while before I realised it was probably more about my own ego. But you can't change anybody. If you love someone that's in pain, you can't change them, unfortunately, but all you need to do is love them. And if you are an addict, for me it's pretty simple. 2 things: believe that you can do it and stop making excuses. Because if you think about our lives and our experiences, every time you thought about getting sober or clean or stop gambling, you thought, but what if I need to do this first? Or I need to win that money back, or another gram or 10 grams or an ounce won't hurt. I need it because it's raining, or because it's that's all of that is bullshit. Yeah. And anything other than that is an excuse. Yeah. So stop making excuses. And I know that sounds really blunt and horrible, but I think the faster you come to that realization of anything other than that, than working on your problems, is an excuse.
Yeah. You guys, you're so amazing, honestly. This is just listening to this so beautiful. Do you think, I mean, it's kind of part of a lot of obviously group therapy groups, but do you think...
I feel like I'm in one.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's good.
LADbible.
Yeah, literally, have you been converted?
I'm converted.
Who sent
Take
you?
this serenity prayer.
Did my therapist make you guys come here?
Does it help? Does it help talking to other addicts?
100%. Like, to be honest, like I think, like this was really, I really enjoyed this, and gonna go away and remember you guys now. Like this conversation here is amazing. Like,
And it stops you from getting complacent as well, because sometimes it's so easy to go, oh, that's in the past, I'm not an addict anymore, and then it will sneak up on you a little bit. Whereas having conversations with other addicts just reminds you that, oh God, yeah, I was actually that bad, and oh, okay, I wasn't that bad, but that's a yet, because I could get that bad, and and it's just like, oh, it's not that bad. Being an addict is actually the best thing that ever happened to me.
And other addicts are ultimately the only people that understand you and what you're feeling. And early on, like when I first stopped, people said, oh, I understand how difficult it must. I was like, no, you don't, and nor should you. That's not your fault, but actually that understanding, that mutual connection is that's so powerful.
Have you ever killed someone? And how did that feel?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Me personally, as a sniper, yes, I have. What did it feel like? It felt pretty to begin with. I felt I was in trouble.